Welcome back to the new academic year, everybody. And I thought we may need to start a little bit light. So I start with a light touch of this topic. In fact, this is not econometric analysis. Is basically a handbook chapter which is forthcoming. And the reason why I start with this one is that it's a kind of follow-up of our CGF ODI AERC conference in September. So we touched upon China's investment, particularly infrastructure investment in Africa. And but we talked about Chinese investment in relation to host countries. So here I think I'm actually coming back to the Chinese side. So I'm standing on the Chinese side. I'm talking about how they invest overseas, how they manage it. So what are the characteristics? So after, if you are interested in this topic, after this seminar, probably you will get a general picture about Chinese overseas infrastructure investment. So that's why there's no particular regions or particular host countries that are involved. It's only from the Chinese perspective. And to understand the Chinese model. So I think I guarantee you, we will have a lot of heavier series research coming in the next few weeks, or maybe after this term. And so we have quite a lot of very good researchers who have published at the top journals who are in our pipeline. So I think you will get a lot of more from at least this year. Let's see how much you get from this year's seminar list. Okay, so this is co-authored with Ruirui Zhu, and SOAS winner Zhu. So Ruirui actually helped a lot with respect to preparing statistics and diagrams, etc., etc. So let me go down to the content. I'm not sure whether Wina is here. I thought Wina is busy with the festival, so I thought it's not necessary for her to come. And so the handbook is forthcoming and edited by Professor Joshua Abel Ito. So let's hope it's a very big handbook. So I'm going to talk about a few aspects on this topic. So first of all, I'm going to provide you with a kind of overview of Chinese overseas infrastructure investment. And then I will focus on discussing the features of Chinese OII. And after understanding those features, you will see the differences between the Chinese OII and infrastructure investment undertaken by some other investors. And after that, I'm going to connect some theories with Chinese OII because people would like to allocate those observations into some literatures, some theories. So, so I put the theories after we discuss the features. And then I will provide, I will discuss some, future perspectives, and those things are dynamic, they are constantly changing. So I really found, we finished this, I think in the first half of this year, but I think something has already, has changed already. So, so I will try to be updated and see how much I can do, and then I will finish. I will finish up with policy implications. So for people to have a good understanding of Chinese overseas infrastructure, I think this is very useful background. So I prepared this basically along the timeline. And just to start with, where China started, how did China end, with this massive occupation of the global infrastructure market. So let me start with this 2001 WTO entry. And I think everybody knows that if you know something about China. So before this WTO entry, China was basically was not allowed to. Well, it's not. It was allowed, but China faced a lot of restrictions in trade, in investment. So China, before that, was famously called the world factory, right? So it's basically manufacturing workshop for everybody else in the global space. After the WTO entry, the changes actually are related to the restrictions. So they relaxed a lot of, restrictions on Chinese trade, Chinese export, etc., etc. So we can take this as a benchmark or milestone. After this year, China actually started performing on the international stage. So going out strategy was immediately proposed after China's WTA. So therefore, China started, a lot of massive, international trade, and China has became an export-related, export-dependent country. And then it goes to the global financial crisis. So China was very active in terms of the trade, in terms of investment. However, the investment was not that massive in terms of, natural resources. It's like a normal, foreign direct investment. And that was SOEs probably were involved much more as compared to private enterprises. And what changed the Chinese investment pattern was actually the global financial crisis. So after the financial crisis, we know what happened. International market had withdrawn. They withdraw quite a lot of orders from Chinese market because they themselves, or the economies themselves, were not doing that well. So the demand was low. So therefore, the demand for Chinese export was very low. And in the meantime, there were a lot of investment opportunities that were actually not attended. So China started from this global financial crisis, saw the opportunities, and China started the massive, large-scale foreign direct investment. And after the financial crisis, there are two things. One is Chinese state-owned enterprises, they went out much more, but they went out particularly to mature market economies, the so-called strategic asset seeking and technology seeking. So that is one of the features of Chinese investment after the global financial crisis. So they went to the advanced economy. They aim to get some strategic assets to get more technology and management skills. And in addition to that, we saw some private enterprises went to the international market to invest. And that was going on until 2013, and that was the year when BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, was formally proposed. Yeah. And you know what happened after this. So nowadays, when we are talking about Chinese expansion to the international market, particularly infrastructure, and that started from BRI. So the investment, China kept on going after the BRI, but the differences between investment after BRI and the investment between the global financial crisis and the BRI is that after the BRI, Chinese investment has been focusing on infrastructure investment. And the destination of the investment are not mature market economy anymore. They are mostly emerging and developing countries or markets. Okay. And so that is, and after the BRI, we see more and more the government's direct involvement in China's international activities, particularly investment activities. And then it goes on until we have this COVID, and we all know that what happened after the COVID. The key feature after COVID is that geopolitical pressure. So geopolitics has now become the most important factor in influencing Chinese international activities. A lot of trade wars, the trade restrictions are coming more and more, and then investment-wise, we see the decline. So we all know this period. We have seen that pattern. So this is basically how China, what the investment, the pattern of Chinese investment in terms of those very important milestones. So why are we interested in China's OII rather than ordinary FDI? Because this type of OFDI or infrastructure investment, overseas infrastructure investment, is different from an ordinary FDI. So they are different because the government is directly involved. Particularly, the government is involved in providing financing to host the country government. So bilateral loans and very often confidential loans, terms and conditions. And then the contract, they are mainly the Chinese SOEs. So the contract of those big projects are mainly Chinese SOEs. And then the destination, as I have already mentioned, are different. So they are normally the countries from the global south. If you think about the differences between China's OII and OII undertaken by some other foreign investors, you can think about a lot of differences. So, for example, I didn't put the concerns for environmental protection, but maybe you can argue this is another difference. So financing is different because the state financing is involved in the Chinese case. Loans repayment is different because very often you see much more dominating type of loan repayment is the commodity-based. And then I mentioned that the destination, and also for other investors, very often, whether they are SOE or not, but the home country government is not really directly involved. And also you heard that if the money is from some other, financial organizations, World Bank or IMF, they very often ask some other additional conditions. But China does not.
But China.
Okay.
Okay.
I heard something. Who? Sorry, can you mute? Who has not mute? Yeah. So let me give you some statistics just to show you the scale or the depth of Chinese infrastructure investment. So we relied on China Global Investment Tracker, and during 2005 and 2023, the total investment in billions is almost 1,000 billions. And this data set only count for large projects, i.e. the project which is bigger than 100 million. So that therefore this number probably is underestimated, is kind of underestimated, because the small projects are not really counted here. So the growth rate during the period is about 13%. And you can take this number. I found I'm shocked to see this the first time. So in 2005, only 17 countries that had received the Chinese OII. But in 2023, there are 143 countries. So basically, about seven countries out of 10 that have received the Chinese infrastructure investment. So quite massive, quite a lot. If you look at the geographical distribution, so we see the colors here. So which color is dominating? And that means the region has been dominating. So I think the purple refers to Sub-Saharan Africa, and the yellow is West Asia. So West Asia in that data set actually contains, Central Asia, even Pakistan, that type of, a lot of Central Asia, or a little bit North Africa, that region. So I think I had this here. So the idea, yes, we can see the red color is actually, red color refers to East Asia. So basically, in terms of the geographical distribution, China has been, from the whole history, China has been focused on three regions: Africa, West Asia, and East Asia. Okay? So Western, you can think about a lot of stands and that kind of country. So they had quite a lot of historical connection, and that figure actually is consistent with our knowledge. So in terms of industrial distribution, again, we look at the colors here, and I think the purple color refers to transportation, and the yellow color is energy. Okay, so we can see very clearly along the whole period that we investigated, two sectors have been dominating. So transportation sector and the energy sector. Okay, and you can see the pattern here. Even let's see, if we look at 2013, basically, yes, the scale is changing, has changed. However, the pattern or the dominance of those two sectors is the same. Actually, the same point here. So if you think about before 2013 and after 2013 BRI, yes, they change in scale. However, the pattern is the same. So 3 regions, they have been very consistent. Okay, so that's the geographical distribution and industrial distribution. And also, I can show you the top host countries in the past. I think this data is in the past decade rather than 2 decades. So what we did here, we actually, for each year, we rank all the recipient countries, all the host countries, according to how much they have received from China, infrastructure investment. So for each year, we ranked them and we see the top 20. So we have 10 years here. If a country appeared in top 20 for 5 times and above, we put those countries together here, and we call them the top host countries. So therefore, you can see them. You can see those countries. Those are mainly developing markets or emerging markets, but there are very occasionally you see Australia and you see Philippines, yeah. So very often they Singapore. So very often they are the countries that are consistent with BRI. BRI invested a lot in developing countries. So that's the first part. That's the overview. So I gave you the historical background. I gave you some statistics. I stressed that why OII differs from others and why that is OII important, because it's government thing. And it shows it is the Chinese model. So now I can summarize features of the Chinese investment. And this page, on this transparency, I summarized a few things. But again, there are many other things that you can argue or you can maybe add on. But to me, those are the main or the key features as far as I can summarize at the moment. So first one is that it's a state connected. So the state-led operation, SOE dominant, and there are some non-economic objectives. The second key feature is bilateral infrastructure financing, which I have already mentioned, but this is indeed one of the Chinese things. And then I will talk, the third one refers to the connection between the Chinese OII and the domestic economic challenges. I'm going down in a little bit detail after this transparency. And the fourth feature that I want to cover is the location choice. So it looks like China differs because China followed a very different principle, a decision-making criterion when they select host countries. And the last one is, I think something that people already know is the soft power element. Okay? So I'm going down each one by one. So I just want to provide you with some more information and to convince you why we think this is a key feature. So the first one is the top-down operational model. So some people argue, actually, China, yes, it started from the central government, but then it is very market-driven at the local level. But to me, this infrastructure investment operation is a top-down approach. So I do not deny there are some market-driving forces at the local level, at the provincial level, for example. But I think even at the provincial level, they are following a very centrally designed blueprint. So the strategy is designed by the central government. And they designed this following this central strategy, they will plan for the financing. And China can do this because the Chinese banking system is still state-dominated. So yes, a lot of smaller, private banks, but in terms of the assets, the structure of the banking assets, in terms of the performance, it is still the top state-owned enterprises, state-owned banks. So therefore, they can arrange financing in relation to the centrally designed strategy. So for example, some researchers, they did a very detailed study. So they went back to the the documents in Chinese. So they translated them into English, and they found out that actually even not only the destination countries that were indicated by the central strategy, but also how much money that they were prepared to give them. So there are a lot of central instructions in terms of the destination countries, in terms of the size of the investment, in terms of the sectors where the investment should go. So therefore, there is another element, and that is they use the Chinese government, they relies on their own very big performers, so national champions. So China has already built up a lot of national champions, and China has a lot of experience in infrastructure domestically already long time before the BRI. So they are very experienced. And so we have some evidence here to convince you that actually a lot of those infrastructure contractors are indeed state-owned enterprises. So there are some already published literature. I think this is for BRI transportation project. So their statistics shows that 89% of the contractors are state-owned enterprises. In our own study, which I think Franklin presented already, we had 61 Chinese contractors, and they are very big Chinese national champions. And we counted that is about 98% of those contractors are state-owned enterprises. And I think, I cannot see that figure. Yes, half of them are SASAC firms. So SASAC firms are even more central because they are owned by the central government. And other state-owned enterprises, they can be owned by the local government, by provincial government. So just a kind of idea to let you know, indeed, a lot of those very big infrastructure contractors are very important Chinese SOEs. And there are some geopolitical or non-economic concerns, for example, destination choice. For example, people argue this type of investment is long-term rather than short-term. Okay. And so that's the first one. Second one, we have seen this quite a lot because foreign observers, they focused on the financing. They talk about the debt problems for host countries. But I can tell you that financing from the Chinese perspective is all organized. There is a whole system from the policy banks. Policy banks are very often provide or they plan for long-term or large-scale loans financing. And then state-owned commercial banks come in at a later stage to match. So state-owned commercial banks, Chinese commercial banks, they work with Chinese SOEs. So SOEs who have obtained the contract, they will go to the state-owned commercial banks to borrow, and then that loans can be used for this construction. So it's kind of the whole thing is a network, it's a system. And then, of course, the debt payment has been talked a lot. I think people have seen this debate. So it can be when you repay, because it's outside China, it's the negotiation between Chinese government and the host country government. Inside China, it is the borrowing relationship between SOEs, the contractors, and state-owned banks. And so when you repay for the host country government, when they repay, they have different types of resources or commodity-based loan repayment. So you can use whatever you got from this project. You can pay minerals from a mining project, pay back to China. You can pay, for example, Angola. We very often talk about the Angola model because Angola uses something else to pay Chinese loans for a mining project, cocoa beans. So another type of payment is that China can take over a port for 50 years, sometimes 99 years, and and to get the right of operating and to get the money back. So those are the payments, loan payment, and of course the debate is very often surrounding whether or not this is purposely designed by China so that they set up a debt trap for host countries, and therefore there is a sovereign issues for host countries. And therefore, there are some corruption issues for some less developed countries. And of course, for China, now we are talking about the risk management of Chinese project, and that is because it created a lot of non-performing loans as well. Okay, so later you will see why, because they invested their money into somewhere that other people are not interested in. Okay. So the third feature that I focused on here is the connection between BRI and the domestic economic problems, particularly three issues. One is the Western Region Development Strategy, and that was initiated 10 years, a decade before the BRI, so 2003-ish. But only after the BRI, those two strategies were integrated closely because they were all operated by the Chinese government. Okay, so one is to reduce domestic inequality or disparity, regional disparity, to encourage Western regions, less developed regions to catch up. And outside is BRI. So they use use BRI as the channels, as the way to promote export, to promote activities of other enterprises in those regions. Okay. It's already, it has been published already. So some Western regions, small and medium-sized enterprises, they grow quickly because they take advantage of this BRI connection. And they are not contractors, but they are own the supply chain. So they just do the trade. So the second issue, domestic issue, is still there. So industry overcapacity. Overcapacity, we still hear this nowadays. We hear a lot, but the industries are different. Now we are talking about EVs, solar panels, batteries. For BRI, we were talking about the construction materials, construction equipment, and some other, related products. And those products, as you know, that China had relied on heavy industries for many, many years. So therefore, those industries, they are overcapacity. They are really overcapacity. So therefore, by providing financing and making those financing to they actually, those financing are tied with procurement. So they use the Chinese domestic supply chains. Basically, the national champions, they have their own different subsidiaries, or they have connections to other state-owned enterprises. So they actually do the project procurement through other connections, other SOEs. And of course, you can imagine this has been, COVID-19 has changed this thing, because the movement is not possible anymore. So therefore, but before COVID, everything is connected. So they hardly use the local markets. And the third one is the energy security. So I think I showed you the distribution, sector distribution, and the regional distribution. The reason why they invested heavily in that particular region, you can see that they have a lot of energy. They have a lot of resources. They have been doing that. And this is a very recent statistic that I just read, while I was waiting for my actually car annual service. So I read the paper, and I saw this picture. I thought, wow, this is a really nice one. The reason why I think this is nice, it is recent. It is about after COVID. It is about where China got its energy supply after COVID. So you can see the negative growth here, and those negative growth was mainly related to African countries. So you know that before COVID, they do a lot of, they use a lot of energy as a repayment method. So China got a lot of energy from Africa. However, after COVID-19, you see that the growth rate is very often negative. And the growth rate is very positive here. And you see that those countries are not African countries anymore. So they are other countries. So they are countries from, southeastern area, from Central Asia. I saw United States here, but I still did not figure it out. But, they are, US is a very big energy supply. So this diagram shows the changes of the supply of energy. So it's already diversified for China. And another message from this one is that this is very much consistent with what we were talking in our annual conference. So the investment has been declining in Africa because they do not rely on resources payment anymore. And so those are the two things that are very much consistent with each other. If China cannot get the resources back to domestic market, probably there is no motivation that they invest. They still invest a lot of very big infrastructure projects. So the I think this is the fourth feature, is the local choice, is the destination, location choice. And that is very important because, where is my, yeah, here. So this is very important because there is a literature on that. So some people compared the location choices. So the people use the so-called institutional indicator as a kind of proxy for whether or not the host country is risky for foreign investors. And so there are some studies already they already documented that China is not really does not really care that much about the risk, the host country political risk, or let's say very often it is institutional development. Okay, and here I gave you some statistics, and the idea is actually during the first few years of the BRI, a lot of countries are ranked very low by Moody's. Moody's is providing credit rating, right? So if for other investors, people probably will not invest in a country such as Pakistan because it has a B3 negative rating, but China has invested a lot. Okay? So the idea is, yes, they know which country is risky, but they do not care. At least statistically, it doesn't show that they care about that. So that's a very interesting observation. And actually, we did something by ourselves. So we looked at the data. The data still very often people have used the similar institutional ranking or institutional score that is taken from the same data source, World Bank governance indicator. So what we did here, remember I showed you the top host countries. So we worked on those top host countries. We checked their institutional score, we checked their institutional ranking, and we calculated the differences between those host countries and China. So we had the Chinese institutional score during this period, I think, from the BRI. So you can see that the mean is another indicator, but look at the median. So many countries that have been receiving a lot of Chinese investment are the countries that are very close to China in terms of institutional ranking, in terms of both institutional ranking and the institutional score. Very often they are lower. Yeah. So that is consistent with the literature. So that means, yes, China has indeed invested a lot in countries that have very low institutional scores and very low institutional ranking globally. And they are close to China. So the last bit, so I would say that's very interesting observation. Yes, but people can think of a lot of different explanations. So, for example, whether or not why does China like those countries? Because they have a lot of resources, maybe. Yeah. So and China is focused on the resources, and maybe because China is use the commodity. I mean, its resources is related with the commodity, but to be able to get the project, to be able to offer the contract to state-owned enterprises, that's something that people can think of. And corruption. Yeah. So the last bit is the soft power elements. I do not need to go through them because you know that China. So I think everybody has a little bit of soft power elements. So social responsibilities, environmental community development. China has faced a lot of problems locally, a lot of protests. If you read some recent papers, and so China started paying a lot of attention to this type of, community responsibility. So cultural things has been always there, but those are the soft power elements. So that's the features of Chinese OII. After this, so if you think about those features, you can add more, but if you think about those features, they are state involvement, very heavy state involvement. They are resources dominating because the payment is very often commodity based. They are yes, so basically they are looking for long term. So, and things like that can be connected to the following theories. Institutional theory, we have been reading a lot for international, from international business literature, but very often before the Chinese multinational corporations got known to other investors or become popular in global market, it was mainly about host country institutions. So the ones the investors, they want to less developed countries, they care about the host country risks. So therefore, institutional theory is relevant for that type of reason. But for China, it's more like a host country institutions that matter, because after let's say the global financial crisis, a lot of emerging market multinational companies, they went to overseas. Puzzle is they performed better than the multinational corporations from advanced economies. And then people started to explain why this is the case. So Chinese multinational companies, they do not have the so-called, what is that? Yeah, I forgot. They do not have this advantages. But why did they perform better? They attributed this to the host country support. Therefore, host institutional theories is more on host country institutions when we talk about emerging market multinational companies. And for infrastructure investment, I think the state capitalism theory is more relevant. And some people argue this is in line with the new mercantilism theory or argument. And they are similar, but they have a slightly different focus. So they emphasize, direct involvement, they emphasize long term, and they pursue international status, particularly in the resource sector. Okay. So there are some papers, there is a literature on this. I think people can follow them, and those can be used to explain Chinese OII unrelated thing, and geopolitical or geoeconomic theories. And those are the new things because everything is now different. If you think about before COVID and after COVID. So it's now like the so-called, it's not a globalization, it's a regionalization, or it's not regionalized, physically regionalized, it's like, global south, global north. And in terms of future perspective, as I said that it has been changing, still it is changing, so we need to update very often. But I think people can think about geopolitical factors. So the supply chain issues, domestic factors is more like a Chinese economy is not doing that well. So a lot of people, they are thinking that China is going to collapse. But I do not think China is going to collapse, but China is changing the growth model. And that's true. And so what do those factors mean for Chinese investment? So by the end of this chapter, actually, we very clearly argue that Chinese investment should focus on localization rather than new investment. So it's not about the scale. Now it is about the depth of localization. It's the integration into the host country rather than new projects. So I can think of the following things, because you can write different papers even on how to localize. There is a literature. And before COVID, even now you can read some papers, and very often you see the negative story of Chinese OII in host countries in terms of the lack of connection. And actually, we ourselves, we did a paper, is about the firm level connection between the Chinese OII contractors and local African firms. So we see the connection is very difficult. Chinese investment does not really produce some productivity spillover. So there are a lot of criticism on Chinese OII. So why is that the case? So I can say the nature of the investment, the Chinese investment, does not allow that much interaction because it is mainly on the energy sector, natural resources, transportation, for example. So the nature of this type of investment, it does not have the that process. So therefore, the connection is at a minimum level. And also the nature of the model of the investment. China used everything from domestic market. So, and that's another problem. And of course, after COVID, this cannot be materialized anymore. So we see the changes. We have seen some changes already. Even EVs in African countries, there are many. And there is another reason from the local side that the capacity is very weak. So we did ourselves, in our own research, we compared local African firms and foreign firms that operate in Africa. They both are involved in Chinese investor, but foreign firms can benefit from the interaction, but the spillover does not exist for local indigenous African firms. So capacity is another problem. If there are some technology level, a certain level of technology involved, can they absorb? So that's another thing. And therefore, I think, in addition, I think there is a bargain, is a position of the bargain between the two sides. So China has technology, infrastructure technology. China has financing. China is in a absolutely, a stronger bargaining position. So therefore, some host countries, they do not even dare to ask the Chinese investment, you should do this, you should do that, for the local community or participants. However, there are some differences. If you compare Africa and Central Asia, so I investigated a bit about Central Asian firms, and there they actually had a higher level of connection, localization, let's say that way. So there are a lot of things that are involved here. But the next question is how to localize. Yeah, the next thing that we are thinking about of Chinese investment in general, not necessarily infrastructure, but more infrastructure because it is state involved. But imagine, maybe in the future, there will be no financing involved. So therefore, we think about the future, how to localize. So a lot of things that Chinese investors can do, use subcontractors, local employee training or local training in general, and manufacturing activities. And that is what we were talking about in our annual conference. So people were talking about modernization, industrialization, but manufacturing sector is very much lagged behind in some less developed countries. For example, in Africa, they talk about manufacturing maybe 10 years ago, but they failed. So there is no manufacture, very little proportion. So that's something that China can do because China is very good at manufacturing. And then we heard a lot of special economic zones, and that's somewhere that you can put everything together and you interact. So I read something, people say special economic zones actually are working very, very well. And now they are talking about small, soft, and technology-oriented projects rather than very big, physically very huge projects. And those projects, they do not need large-scale financing, so it's easier to use, to be localized. And they very often touch upon people to people, and so there are some opportunities here. And for China, we also argued why localization is necessary, because otherwise you cannot do anymore. So first of all, you have to have the social license of doing things in host countries. So therefore, you cannot do that, because after COVID, the model, it does not work anymore. So you just need to do this. So the last bit is policy implications. So of course, there are some policy implications that you can think of for international organizations, IMF, World Bank, decision makers, but I focused on host countries and China. So for host countries, the problem is how to prepare themselves to engage with China differently. So yes, before COVID, probably they relied on the Chinese financing. But now you need to think about more than financing. Okay, so that problem is becoming more and more obvious because some infrastructure loans now is due or after 10 years, so they are coming. So the debt management problem is an issue. How to manage natural resources. We saw some resource curse problems still there. So how you can use your advantage of having natural resources to upgrade yourself to in the global supply chain, for example, critical minerals nowadays. And then I mentioned the capacity building of local participants. So local firms, if China in the next 10 years are going to invest a lot of AI, can you observe? Can you cooperate? Can you work on them? So that's something that people, policymakers from host countries should work on, capacity building, and host country institutions is another thing. So the governance thing is another agenda. And for China, I can think of some emerging new problems. For example, geopolitical. Of course, geopolitics is a very big pressure now. You see a lot of competitions from other investors, other countries. They set up similar things as China's BRI, and of course, they are very small at the moment. So, but in response to those political pressure, how do you do your localization? So in some areas, China is the world leader. So you cannot really imagine how you can transfer AI technology to a country that does not even have manufacturing. So what to share, how to share, those are the issues. It's not like the most advanced thing, it's like the most suitable thing. But how and what? So also host country risks will come to the priority for Chinese investors, because imagine if there is no more financing and some host countries, they cannot, they do not need to follow you anymore in some ideological issues. So there are more risks if you still invest in some countries that are institutionally very poor. And how do you manage those risks? Particularly, how do Chinese private enterprises manage those host country risks? So we will see more and more involvement of Chinese private firms, not necessarily in the ordinary, in the ordinary of FDI, but maybe in infrastructure investment. Because think about it, if there's not financing involved, SOEs will lose advantages. Okay, so then who are coming to do the job? For example, in the technology sector, it is very often privately owned enterprises are at the front. So they will involve more. So how do they deal with host country risks? And for SOEs, another feature is, they are representing the government. In the past, the government is there to provide the financing, to negotiate with host countries. So the state-owned enterprises were kind of protected. But without financing, there are more challenges. So as we see at the beginning, SOEs were facing illegitimacy problems. So they are representing a country, particularly they are representing a country, a government that has a completely different ideology. So how are they going to survive? How are they going to compete with others? So those are the issues that I can imagine. As I say, everything is changing. So I think we just need to keep on watching and reading and to follow the development. So this is my part. So I hope it is clear. So as I said, within this 1 hour, a little bit over, I actually gave you an overall picture of Chinese infrastructure investment on the global stage, without any mentioning of the host countries. Okay, thank you very much. So I hope we have some questions or comments.
I can start the process. I'm sure there are many people coming up with questions.
Yes.
So I just wanted to quickly ask you, there's something that struck me when you were presenting, when you showed because when I was looking at the sort of the recipient countries list, I saw that among the top countries were countries that have like a kind of a surplus capital situation. Countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, they're actually not necessarily lacking in capital. Uh, so, what is the kind of way in which you reconcile that to the fact that they're among the top recipients? Is it a different form of infrastructure that China is investing in these places?
Very, very relevant, very good point. I have not really read that much about the Middle East, but the point you raised is very interesting because they are themselves are the investors in Africa, for example, as well. But according to what I read, is that the Chinese investment in Middle East, for example, they focused on high-tech sector. They focused on digital. So the focus of the investment is the technology rather than financing, rather than the fundamental, the road, the railways. They are more technology related. So I was thinking about the differences among different regions, but this is one thing that struck me when I was thinking about the comparison. And I think the human capital, the level of human capital is higher there as well. So, but you see, if there is a technology element involved, China is still leading the sector because China has the technology. And related to the technology, China invested a lot of money in those projects as well. So I think this is something that I know for this moment, but that's a very good direction to go deeper. Thank you. Anything else? Meng, I cannot see.
Yeah, we don't have anyone hand up.
Okay. Oh, good. So yeah. So but I'm sure it's very easy to understand. There is no model, no. Oh, I see Martin.
Yeah, Martin's hand up.
So Martin, hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. I would like to ask you whether you have any estimates of the cost of finance from the Chinese state banks for these infrastructure projects, and how does that compare with the cost from other sources, such as Western sources? Is this finance predominantly concessional or semi-concessional, or is it on commercial terms?
Yeah. So Martin, that's a very big question. And to be honest, I have no idea about the cost of financing from the Chinese side using one number or one sentence. So I think what you mentioned, they have different types. Even the export credit, they have different types that are related to firms that are involved in this project. As I said that, it is very difficult to calculate. It's not like a private investment project. We use NPV. We use those traditional budgeting methods to calculate the cost of finance capital. So in China, everything is operated on the country level. You do not really have the data to calculate the cost of capital for each project. So therefore, people argue because there are a lot of non-economic objectives that are involved. So, for example, China in the past 10 years invested a lot in the critical minerals or, that type of, natural resources. Now you see the payoff. So probably during the past 10 years, there is no return. But now you see China is controlling the very important element of the supply chain for EVs, for, that is relevant to everything here. So I do not have the idea how to calculate this cost of capital, and I cannot really say how much. But I think in terms of the loans, it's very similar. Sometimes it's higher than the market rate.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else? Oh, Ellen. Hi, Ellen.
Can you say a bit more about the sort of the strategic direction of China's investment in South America? I know you spoke quite a lot about Africa and Middle East, which I believe have been the major destinations so far. But I'm looking at sort of some of the acquisitions China has made in sort of lithium mines and that sort of thing in South America, and just the sort of geology of South America containing these important minerals. Do you see an increased focus on South America rather than Africa and the Middle East going forward?
That's a really, really good question. So we needed to have a coffee to catch up with those. Yeah, it's a very good point. And that is the region that, to me, will be coming more and more important. And that was the reason why, in our September annual conference, I invited ambassadors from, diplomats from the Embassy of Brazil, because I see the trade pattern is already there. Brazil is the largest one. Argentina has a lot of critical minerals that China is very much interested in. But Argentina economically is not doing well. And China invested in Peru in natural resources. So China is very active there. So, I had a trip in August. I tripped around the 4 countries. So it's because I'm so curious about this region. So I talked to people, So I think China is not really like African people who welcome Chinese investment that much. But they do not really. It is divided, to be honest, whether or not they welcome Chinese infrastructure investment, because they think, let's say Brazil, economically is doing very well. So Brazil has a lot of bargaining power. So they need to restrict the Chinese investments if they are coming. So that's one thing. And I think I was asked, so do you think China will use financing to control? I do not think so, because they are better. The level of economic development is higher. So I think it's more like a technology things. And I also think, so think about Brazil, they have a lot of EVs, Chinese EVs there. So things like this type of interaction will be more and more. And so I think in general, this is a very interesting region. So it is coming. I think it is coming more important. I mean, China is actually, although China has invested in different regions, but China has different policies. Very clever, actually. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Thanks. So why don't we close this session so that we can have our own time? And I hope you found this informative, at least. As I said, that there are more that we need to work on. So without further comments, I would close this session, and thank you very much for your attendance today.
Thank you.
As I said that next week we will have a very strong paper. So we'll have more stronger paper. So please come. Okay, thank you very much. I'll see you around.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.